Good afternoon.
All right.
You've often been referred to as the janitor of history.
Mm.
Can you explain in simple terms what that means and what that refers to?
Well, the professor is one who is trained to function in certain things. The janitor is the one who comes behind the professor and cleans up the mess that the professor left behind. I'm one of those people who had to learn history, our history, the hard way on my own. And in the process, I devoted myself to confronting those missing pages from the textbooks about me, about us. Consequently, I'm the cleanup man who knows where all the dirt is and pull it out.
In an earlier conversation, you told me that your grandmother, required that you read the Bible before you were allowed to go outside to play.
Yes.
And as I listened to you relate that to me, I was curious as to how that experience and your grandmother in particular shaped you as an artist.
Well, interestingly enough, what she was doing was she was insisting that I learn how to read and write in Spanish, as well as what I had already been doing up until that point, 7 and 8 years old. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. All right, so my Spanish was like practically non-existent. While I was bilingual and understood everything that was being said, I was never taught how to read and write in the language of my forebears in terms of my family line. So when my grandmother was helping to raise me between the time I was 7 and 11 years of age, she insisted that I read 2 chapters of the Bible every day before I could go out to play after school. And of course to explain those chapters to her as proof that I had actually read them and that I'm not conning her with the same chapters or anything like that, right? She offered herself as my guide through the language. And I told her, I says, but Grandma, I don't know how to read in Spanish. She says, you know how to read in English? I says, yeah. She says, that's all you need, and I'm right here. For any words you don't understand, just bring them to me, right? So I did it. Interestingly enough, I don't know if she understood this, but in addition to the issue of ethics and morals that the Bible is supposed to nurture into you, what she actually was doing was introducing me to world poetry. When you look at the Bible from the point of view of being a work of poetry representing one nation, 1,000 years of their poetry, narrative as well as lyrical, then you're understanding what makes the Bible so remarkable, right? What she ended up doing was giving me the groundings for understanding literature and poetry in particular.
As I listened to you talk about what your grandmother required that you do, it reminded me of something that Ben Carson, the surgeon out of Johns Hopkins University, was required to do when he was a child. His mother could not read at all, but she required that her children go to the library and get a book and read and give her a book report. Now she kind of played them because she couldn't read, so that when she had their finished product in her hands, she pretended that she was reading. And that experience is what changed him because he had a very troubled life. But as she kind of played him, he got into the act and the activity and the urgency of reading. And that is what made him an intellect. That is what gave him the spiritual and the intellectual prowess to become a good student and subsequently to become a doctor. Reading.
Yes.
Reading.
Well, I was fortunate that way as well. My mother taught me the basics of reading before I was 4. So by the time I get into kindergarten and the first grade and stuff, I already have a basis for understanding what I'm getting ready to start learning, right? When my mother and father broke up, I would always visit with, I lived with my father and I visited with my mother during the breaks in school. And it happens that at the time she was living in various neighborhoods, 2-3 year wops, you know, and then moving on. And so there weren't too many people that I would know in the neighborhoods that she lived in with whom I could play. Consequently, I'd be in the house a lot. She worked for a publishing company, Curtis Publishing, which put out all kinds of magazines, Saturday Evening Post, Life, Look, etc. And Saturday Evening Post in particular had a lot of reading material in it that was of interest to me. She used to save those copies, and so that every time I visit, there'd be a nice load of magazines, serialized novels. They used to do that back then, you know, right? Every issue there'd be another excerpt from a novel. And so I'd be able to read novels, pirate stories as a child. Pirate stories really turned me on. I didn't know Frank Yerby was an African American. Right?
From Augusta, Georgia, in fact,
Oh,
my
yeah?
hometown.
Oh, wonderful. But the thing is that he turned me on with his pirate stories.
Okay.
You know, right?
Okay.
And then he taught me tricks in the language. When you wanted to say black people, but you wanted to appeal to white folks, you would use terms like swarthy complexion.
Okay. Okay.
And a lot of his pirates, who were actually buccaneers, and buccaneers were runaway slaves who had taken to the seas,
Okay.
right? He had a lot of characters who were of swarthy complexions.
You know, I first encountered you when I was in college, and that has been one of the most fortuitous occurrences in my life. When I came to New York, I had a chance to hear you on a number of occasions. So I consider this a sacred moment in that after all this time, this chasm of time, I have the opportunity to sit and talk with you again. And one of the things that Ms. Collins and I have tried to do with this forum, Conversations at Wadley, is to try and introduce brothers and sisters to some of the pioneers and some of the architects of our experiences. Those brothers and sisters who have, through their presence, their spiritual presence, and their intellectual clarity, have tried to separate the wheat from the chaff, have tried to let us see that there's a lot of bull, but there's a lot that we should be about. So we're pleased that you're here to kind of help us continue to separate some of that wheat from the chaff. Earlier, in this very room, I heard you talk to a young sister who had shared a poem with you, and you were making some suggestions to her. I'd like you to share some of that with us, because later on it is our intent for you to share some of your work with those young brothers and sisters who will see this program. I was struck when you suggested that she listen to the rhythm of language, and that it really isn't necessary to make a poem rhyme.
Right.
But if you can make your being, your psyche, open to that energy,
That's
you can
right.
become a better craftsman, a better poet.
Wonderful.
Would you share some of that with us?
Okay. First, understand that rhyming is simply one of the many devices that you have available to you as a writer. All right? There are a whole array of other devices. The purpose, the problem with the younger generation that is now, and since hip hop has gone, and rap has gone back to rhyme, is because they have not been introduced properly to their predecessors. The people who came before them had broken with all kinds of traditions and standard forms, and had developed on a remarkable collection of free verse literature, right? It happens that the youngsters who got into rap and hip hop and into spoken word, although spoken word is more free verse, they were not properly introduced to the people who came before them. Consequently, the only thing that they had available to them was what they knew, and what they knew was what they were taught, and what they were taught was that poetry is supposed to rhyme. But there's a music there's a rhythm, there's a spirit that happens in the way you walk, the way you dress, the way you move your hands and talk, and I mean, and all of that richness that is peculiar to you. Your job is to capture that on page, you see, right? But when you're restricted to category and form, you see, right? You're boxed in, and it doesn't always speak to your spirit. You see, you're peculiar. What makes you you? Right? It's like one egg, as opposed to the male child, who has as many as 250 million sperm that he produces in one day. 250 million sperm, only one of them is going to get into that egg, right? The other 249,999,999 others, they're not going to get inside that egg. That's how unique and special you are. The music that moves you, that shapes you, the rhythms that appeal to you, that's not rhyme, that's sound. And so, your job as a poet is to try and capture the richness, the naturalness of that sound. It's like the way a woman sachets, she develops that. When you develop that side, that's on the rhyme thing. But there were other points there that I'd like to quickly hit at. What we were talking about there was craft, right? But there are other aspects to what goes into a poem. Content. Yes, tell it like it is, right? In terms of what your reality is and what that looks like, lay it out there. But as well, tell it like it ought to be. That's what John Oliver Killens used to say. The responsibility of the writer is not only to tell it like it is, but to tell it like it ought to be as well. Not just our desperate state, but as well what we aspire to, you see. Not just the way it is, but the way it should be, the way it could be. The possibilities are there. That's content. Then there's the issue, and I was discussing that with her too. Then that's craft, whether you get stuck in one form or explore all the possibilities there are. There's the content, and then there's the intent. Where do you leave me at the end of the work? What message did you connect with me, in me, from your point of view? How did you enrich me? You see, and those three pieces are what goes into whatever the work is. Whether you're conscious of it or not is beside the point. That you are more conscious of it says how deliberate you are.
There's a lot that we'd like to try and cover this afternoon, but I'd like to mention your latest work, Scattered Scripture. How long did it take you to write this book? And would you share a poem or two?
Sure. Well, I was one of the people, as a college student, a little older than most college students. I didn't get into college until I was just about 24. We come into the colleges when there are no quote-unquote ethnic studies. Consequently, there's nothing in the college for me to touch base with about my insides and my reality and the way I perceive and perspect, right? That was not part of the curriculum. So I was part of that generation that helped to force ethnic studies into the college curriculum, and in so doing legitimize the study of people and cultures as contributors to the whole, not as side players that don't even exist. No invisible men here, a la Ellison, right? But actually vibrant forces that were always at work. African, Asian, Latin American, African American, Caribbean. We wanted all of that in the schools. By the time that I finished college, by the time that all of that was in place, I was one of the people that helped organize it. By the time all of that was in place, it was time for me to graduate from college. Consequently, what I did not know and could never get to learn after college, I had to hunt down for myself. Come to find out, I decided that translating history into poetry would make for a good collection.
Okay.
And so it took me 21 years, because I'm finding things out as I'm going along on my own, and then writing poems about those missing pages,
Okay.
right, in the history books, right, that I had uncovered, that I had found and reflected. And that has to do with both the African diaspora in the Americas, and the fact that there is much that comes out of the Caribbean, you know, right, that affects what has happened in the United States. And I wanted to get into a lot of that. So it took me 21 years to complete. When I finished the 125 pages, I realized that the difference between you and I is what informs us. The books you read are not necessarily the ones that I read. The ideas and the people who influence you are not necessarily the same who influence me. So in addition to the 125 pages, I had to add 41 pages of footnotes, not to explain the poem, but to give the historical background to each of those poems. Right?
Before you share a poem or two
Okay.
with us, oftentimes I hear brothers and sisters say, "Well, I'm Dominican, and you're Puerto Rican, or you're a black person from Augusta, Georgia. So no, you stay over there,
Okay.
I stay over here," and those kinds of assessments always trouble me, because they ignore the fact that when our ancestors were snatched from Africa, some of us were dropped in Rouville, Mississippi, and
Right.
in Carolina,
That's right.
Puerto Rico,
That's right.
and in Peru and Colombia.
That's right. That's right.
How do you respond to those kinds of inappropriate
You see, okay.
assessments?
First, you have to understand the problem in the condition. The fact of the matter is that most human beings are very, very provincial. I was born and raised on these 5 square blocks, and for the first 20 years of my life, this is the only reality I know. That's my village, that's my region, that's the only thing that I know. Consequently, in my first 20 years, I am thoroughly shaped by what I understand the reality to be in that one little place.
Okay, can I just add something as you
Yes,
continue?
go ahead.
What troubles me is that our oppressors,
Yes.
those who dislike us and
That's
who
right.
diss us, they use those kinds of perspectives to
Right.
keep us separated
Wonderful.
and to keep
That's
us
right.
oppressed.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. Now, the thing is that once I get past 20, I have to come to grips with the fact that there's an entire planet. When I get to that point, and if I was nurtured to any degree with a healthy perspective, however provincial, I can begin to understand better. And the more I read, the more I understand. That's the secret to reading, by the way, and to writing. You understand and you take a position. You read and you write. You see, that defines how definitive you can be. That you are real, you're corporeal, you're here. Now, what happens is we have this weakness that is very human in terms of being provincial. I'm from the Bronx, you from Brooklyn, we never get along, you know, right? They're from Queens, they're silly, you know, and you develop that. Now, the thing is that while that's going on, what's happening is you're not being taught the reality of the situation and in its broader sense, the planetary view. The fact of the matter is that you're coming from the point of view of only from the United States or only from the Dominican Republic or Cuba or Nicaragua or Panama. You're not coming from the point of view of the world. you got to understand, once we got past your provincialism, we have to understand that there were 6 nations that invaded this hemisphere. The Danes, Denmark, the Netherlands, the Dutch, England, France, Portugal, and Spain.
Right.
All right, now, and not necessarily in that order. The Spaniards were the first, followed by the Portuguese, followed by the French and the English,
Right.
and the Dutch, followed by the Swedes and the Danes. In either case, what happens is all of those 6 countries came with the intention of invading, conquering, and enslaving the local populations. Right? They didn't come to trade. They didn't come to hone their way into an alliance of sorts. They came to take. Right? Now, when they were killing, particularly in the Caribbean, 3,000 islands, when they were killing the native populations to the point where they were losing out on their labor force, then they brought in Africans. Anywhere from 100 million to 200 million Africans over a 400-year period were stolen, kidnapped from Africa, where they were, for the most part, free people, brought over here and made into slaves here. That's across the board. There is not one country in this hemisphere where the invasion, the conquest, the enslavement, and the importation of Africans to supplement labor, right? There's not one country in this hemisphere where that did not happen, all right? So there's a lot of connectiveness that we have that we don't pay enough attention to, right? There's a lot of common differences that we have, and there are a lot of different commonalities that we share. And the more we get next to that, the better we understand what the game plan was 500 years ago and what the game plan is for the next 100 years. And it's all one continuum. It's like the river. Where does the river begin? Up in the mountains, in the ocean, in the springs? You don't know. It's circular.
What is the game plan?
Basically, it's to duplicate, in one short, quick sentence, to duplicate the Roman Empire, okay, which was a duplication of the Egyptian Empire. The idea and the notion that there should be only one absolute controller over everything.
So does that translate into the oppression of people of color?
Yes, sir, because they're not human beings. They're colored.
Okay.
I mean, look, the language tells you that. Mm-hmm. With the moment that you say that I'm not white, right, you're using white as your definition or your yardstick for what is human. That's what you really said.
Okay.
And no matter what I do, you're always going to look at me and see what I am not,
okay,
instead of looking at what I am.
Okay.
You see? Anyway.
I want to move forward a little bit because I want to hear some of your work.
A poem?
If I may, before I hear a poem, we were talking earlier about what's happening right here in Harlem on 125.
Yes.
And you made some very incisive observations. And could you repeat them as succinctly as you could so that we can hear some of your work?
All right. First, there is the real estate game that always gets played in the city. The real estate game runs quickly like this. You allow for a certain area to deteriorate and you ignore it. You pimp it. You suck it up. You get all the rent that you can, all the money that you can out of it, and you just let it deteriorate while you are using that same money to support and supplant other areas. There's a point at which that area that you ignored completely and let deteriorate, that area becomes the focus for quote-unquote speculation and redevelopment. If it's completely desolated, then the speculators can buy it up cheap, develop it, but not for the people that used to live there, but for a new crew that's got long bread, right? And that becomes racial. Because well, the thing is that long bread and white are the two yardsticks in this country in terms of what is human and what is acceptable or what is expected. Not that we don't make money, but that we're not expected to. Notice that Bill Cosby was making $90 million a year at one point and was getting ready to invest to buy NBC. And while he had the money, he didn't have the right color.
Right, exactly.
You see, right? And so
exactly.
they wouldn't let him do it.
Exactly.
Now, what happens is, so that's one game that gets played. Another game that gets played is gentrification. Same deal in terms of real estate. What happens is you raise the price, the market value of a given place, like brownstone, Harlem brownstones. You raise the price for that because there are people you know who are willing to pay that price. Well, what that ends up doing is it raises the value of the property, which in turn raises the tax base for that property, which in turn means that the owner of the place has to raise the rent. Well, raising the rent on his tenants means that they eventually have to leave because they can't afford it anymore. So then when they leave, then either the owner sells it or loses it because of his inability to pay taxes. That allows for someone to come in to buy something that was worth 3 years ago, 5 years ago, $190,000. Now it's worth $400,000, $500,000, and that eliminates the roots of a community. In this case, the African American community in Harlem, the capital of Black America, known throughout the world. Right? That's very cultural and spiritual. So you uproot those people and you bring this upper middle class into play, right? And like that. That's the second game that gets played. The third game is like what you see at across 125th Street, which is all these huge conglomerate stores owned by corporations that are basically international, Disney and etc. like that. And the thing is that what that does is that drains the community out of its own money. I work, I live in the community, I bring my cash in here. But the fact is that dollar that I bring in here, someone is scooping up because I'm buying in his store. He scoops it up and takes it right out of the community. That's what Malcolm used to talk about. The fact that when you let the dollar circulate inside your community, by you buying and living inside that community, that what ends up happening is you enrich it, right? All right.
And I know that Monday is your birthday, as well as Malcolm's birthday.
Yes.
I'd like you to share, if you will,
all right,
Malcolm's poem, and if we have enough time, another poem.
Yes, all right, but that's like a 4-minute poem. Should we hit it?
Yes, sir, we should hit it.
Was you there? Was you ever there? In a place you never been, but you knew you was there before, and you was never there. I was. In a place I knew me to be when I was never really there. I was there. On a sunny Harlem Sunday, I was there. Was you? In a ballroom, on a beaming, gleaming Harlem corner, in a sunny sunset ballroom, did you hear? In a shiny, shining wildlife ballroom, did you hear the bullet cry? Did you see the man fall on a bright and bosom Sunday? On a bosom bright street jam, spare me a dime, stale bread, bosom brother, sunny Sunday Harlem, was you there? Did you see the bullet who cried? Did you hear the man's fall? I was there, in a crowd of pride and treason, in a chill-filled room of mobs and patriots, in a crowded crowd of pride and treason, where scared scars was ducking on scared screams, ducking on scared scowls, ducking 'cause they heard the bullet cry. Duck! 'Cause they heard the reason the bullet cried. Duck! As the man showed the marks, old shackles left behind, as his back arched tall, breaking shackles left behind, I heard the bullet cry. No, not me! I saw the man fall in a place I never was, where I must have been before. I saw the man fall. Did you? Did you ever? Did you ever try to be where you never could have been, yet somehow you had to be there? On the 21st of the second month in a double-aisle room tight, dancing, jumping, bawling floor, did you hear? Did you hear the gush of puddles gushing from the podium bench? Did you see the barrel stock kicking back a shotgun swing? Did you hear the pellets fly? Did you see the knowledge flow? Did you hear his woman's feet? Did you hear his woman? Did you see his woman's feet? Did you see his woman climbing over and up, over, up and over, face down rows of turned down faces? Did you hear his woman's plea? That's my husband, that's my husband! Was you there? Did you go? Did you go to hear a poem in his every word? Did you hear a poem in his every word? Did you hear a poem? Was you there? Did you feed the hollow caves of starving eardrums? Did you feed the hollow crave of eardrums starving? Did you go to hear his song? Did you hear him sing? I was there, in a place I could never be. I saw the bullet's tears tearing. I was there, in a place I could never be. I heard the bullet's tears tearing. I was there. I saw the bullet shiver, the lonely bullet shiver and push, shiver and crush through the horn-rimmed frames of a strong man's peace. I heard the bullet cry. Why me? Why me? Don't make me do it. Don't make me. Taking aim at courage. I heard the bullet cry. Taking aim at courage. I saw the bullet cry. Did you? Did you? Was you there? Was you? Was you turning over chair holes, finding no room for cover space? Was you turning over chair holes, finding no room? Was you turning over chairs while the man was falling, and the bullet begging as the man was falling, and the bullet limping as the man was falling, and the bullet breaking, and the bullet breaking, and the bullet breaking through the throbbing corner of a people's heartstream, turning chairs over chairs, finding no room? Was you there? Was you? In a place you never been, but somehow you was there somehow, and you was never there. I was there, in a place I had to be to hear the bullet cry. Murder! To see our manhood fall. Murder! To watch a part of me fall. I was there, on a sunny Harlem Sunday, in a place I'd never been, on the 21st of the 2nd, in a room I can't forget, on a stage I'd never seen, with a man I barely knew. I saw the bullet cry. I heard the man fall.
Wow. My brother, I sincerely thank you for being here today. When you come back, we're going to explore these kinds of conversations more in depth. The book is Scattered Scriptures. It's my pleasure to have sat alongside in the same room in the presence of Brother Reyes Rivera. Thank you.